Well, that's a lot of money. I know. And 2 weeks ago, a cousin that I never even knew I had died and left me $85,000. Wow, sounds like you've been blessed. You don't understand. He said, well, last week my great aunt passed away. I inherited almost $250,000. And now his friend was really, really confused. He said, then why do you look so sad? He said, this week, nothing. That's kind of how we are, isn't it? You know, God blesses and blesses and blesses us. And this week, nothing. See, this is where Noah is in his walk with God at this point. Been through the storm. How would you like to be cooped up with all those animals and just your family? Hard to take out your frustration when it's only family, isn't it? A good friend of ours had a farm, and one day he was just venting a little bit. And his wife said, why does everything that happened around here have to be my fault? And he said, well, Alice, there's just the two of us. And it's certainly not going to be my fault if I'm the one finding it. That's the way we are, isn't it? Poor old Noah, in a boat with stinking animals. I don't imagine it smelled very good after a year. Can you imagine? You know, Noah wasn't a young man when he started this endeavor. He was 500 years old before he ever had any children. He's on the boat for a year. It's not a pleasant place. But the storm's over. And here he is, a carpenter with nothing to build with. All the vegetation has been destroyed. No lumber. You know, some of us have found that in our life, haven't we? Everything that we planned for, everything we thought would be where we wanted it at a certain time of our life, it's gone. We have to start over. The rain's passed. Water's receding. Now Noah the carpenter becomes Noah the farmer. And he's planting seeds and vineyards. Do you know what it's like to start over? There's two ways to look at this. One is that you've got a blank slate. Everything from here on is brand new. The other is, see, I've got nothing to begin with. Mrs. Lum, who sits over here every Sunday, her husband was a pastor. I knew him most of my life. And one day we were talking, and I knew that he was leaving the church that he was pastoring. It was a church that most people would desire to go to. It was a growing church. They just built a brand new parsonage. He and his family had only lived in there just a short time. And he was leaving that and going to a small church in a small town with about 10 people. So I'm a young preacher, and he's an older preacher. And I asked him, Leonard, why would you do that? Start over at this stage of your life. And here's what he said. Because that's the only church in Rockwood. And I'd like to go pastor a church that can't go anywhere but up. He said it's gone so far down that it couldn't go any farther down. So anything is going to be an improvement. And he proved that out. He went there and spent a good many years. And that's where his son Steve, that you know, grew up, was in Rockwood. And it was the only church in town. And he had all the weddings and all the funerals and made inroads till this day. Mrs. Lum still keeps in touch with people in that little town of Rockwood. So Leonard's view was it's a clean slate. I start out with no problems. I start out with no preconceived notions. And he loved that. He liked that idea. But you know, starting over is never easy. After a fire, after a flood, after death, after divorce, after the career ends. I could probably preach a whole message on starting over. But we won't do that today. Because before we get into this, I want to remind you, the Bible records events. It never changes them, and it doesn't try to cover them up or make them look better than they are. It's simply a record, and it reveals the true nature of mankind. And so, here's the statement. After the storm, Noah got drunk. You know, some people get depressed after their storm. Some give up. We work with and have worked with many people fighting addictions. And they go through storm after storm after storm. And they give up. And they get drunk or they get high. Just last week, we buried a young man. Always these stories are sad and tragic. A young man who lived in Florida, but was from this area. His mother was going to go down and spend a few weeks Christmas time with him. She'd already bought the ticket for the auto train. Her car was going to get loaded onto the train. She was riding the train, going to get down there. Before her car ever got loaded on the train, she got word he passed away from a drug overdose. No, it wasn't intentional. He had no intention of taking his life. He didn't do it purposely. But he was an addict. And we had his funeral last week. And we had probably 250 to 270 people in the funeral home for the funeral. And probably that many that came through and left. And I thought, if that young man only knew how many lives he impacted through one act that he thought was a selfish act and wouldn't hurt anyone else. That's how he got through his storm. One more period of getting high. Here's Noah, the only righteous man on the earth. That's what God said just a few years earlier. The man that God entrusted to build the ark. The man that saved his family. The man that we could tell story after story about. Then I think of David, who was a man after God's own heart and who was found guilty of committing adultery and murder. The point is, none of us are immune from failing or from falling. The Bible says, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest he fall. You know, here's the deal. God doesn't want us to sin, not even one time. That's not his plan. He wants us to live righteous and holy. But he's made provision for us if we do. That's the amazing thing of the gospel. John wrote it like this, my little children, these things write I unto you, that you sin not even once. But if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. So now, what? Well, let me just say, no matter who you are, or what you've done, or who you've done it with, you can start over. And the point of this message is not to focus on failure, but to point out there's a way to go back. A way back after failing, a way back after falling. Because after the storm, it's time to rebuild. I've met people who have never gotten over the storms of their life. Years later, they're still talking about the storm that they went through. Last night downstairs, we listened to one of our own as he shared his story of living in the storm. How God brought him through addiction and sin and sorrow. But here's what I noticed about his story. He did not focus on the storm, but he focused rather on the Savior that brought him through the storm. And someday we may prevail on him to share that story with you here. Because it's a powerful story of God's love and God's redemption and God's bringing man back to himself. Some want to dwell in the ruins. They're so depressed, they just can't think of anything else. And they stay in their circumstances. But here's the thing. Storms always bring out our emotions. And emotions are the most powerful force inside us. Under the power of emotions, people have done the most heroic and sometimes the most barbaric acts. And what are the emotions that cause people to act? Well, I think there's a number of them, but there's four basic ones. And it can be a combination of several. The first emotion I want to share with you today is disgust. Now, you may not think of that in a positive frame of mind. But here's a guy that got so disgusted with the way he was living and what his life was turning out to be that he said, I'm going to make a change. I'm not going to live like this anymore. A girl come knocking on his door. And she said, Mister, would you like to buy a box of Girl Scout cookies for $1? $1! And he didn't have $1. And he got disgusted that day and said, never going to be in this situation again. And he wasn't. He died a millionaire. I knew that man. I heard that story many times. $1, he said. I didn't have $1. And I was embarrassed to tell a little girl, I can't buy any Girl Scout cookies because I don't have $1. So I don't know what is the day that turns your life around, or what it is that you finally say, I've had it, I'm not going. But I've talked with addicts before, and they've got to get to that point where they finally said, you know what, I've had it. You know John C. that's here every Sunday. And John will be the first to tell you he's ruined his life with alcohol. But 3 years ago was his I've had it day. He had several before that, but not like he had 3 years ago. Over here in the hospital, lying on the bed, realizing I've had it. I cannot live like this anymore. He signed himself into a rehab, went through the program, and faced the biggest storm of his life, and is still facing storms, and we still pray for him regularly. But he's made up his mind, I never want to go back to where I was. So yes, productive feelings of disgust come through when a person says, you know what, it's enough. Enough is enough. The guy has finally had it with mediocrity. He's had it with those awful sick feelings of fear and pain and humiliation. He says, I'm not going to live like this anymore. Watch out. That could be the day that turns a life around. Call it whatever you want. I've had it day, the never again day, the enough's enough day, whatever you want to call it. It's a powerful emotion. Disgust. I've had it. I'm not going to live like this. The second emotion I want to share with you this morning is decision. Most of us have to be pushed, don't we, to make decisions. That's why God gives us wives. And why God gives you husbands. We push each other. Don't like it. We sometimes push back. Sometimes we have to be pushed to make a decision. And then once we reach that point, we have to deal with the conflicting emotions that come with making them. We've reached the fork in the road. And no matter what that decision is, it ties us up in knots. Our stomach is churning. We stay awake at night. We wake up in the middle of the night. We break out in a cold sweat. Because making life-changing decisions can be like an internal war. Conflicting armies of emotions, each with its own arsenal of reasons. They battle with each other for supremacy of our minds. And then our resulting decisions, whether they're bold or timid, thought out or impulsive, can either set the course of action or blind it. I don't have much advice to give you about decision making except this. Whatever you do, don't camp out on the fork of the road. Some friends of ours, their name was Ken and Norma Craig. My family knows them. Ken and Norma were in the car. Ken was sleeping. Norma was driving, and she came to a fork in the road. And she didn't know which way to go. And she said, Ken, where to aim? Before he could answer, she went right straight into the swamp. And he said, for heaven's sake, Norma, why did you do that? She said, I didn't know where to go. You ever been there? You don't know whether to turn left or right. You don't know what to do, and next thing you know, you're in the middle of a storm. I know everybody today is not going to agree with me on this, but I'm going to tell you sometimes it's better to make the wrong decision than to not make any decision at all. Let me explain that. A good friend of mine who was an engineer with IBM, brilliant man, but he couldn't make a decision to save his life because he had to plan everything out. And he and I were in some business endeavors together, and I'm not that way. I'm too much the other way. And one day he said to me, he said, you're just like one of my managers. I said, how's that? He said, let's do something even if it's wrong. I said, that's exactly how I am. You picked it up. I said, because if it's wrong, we can change it. But if we don't do anything, we're still where we were 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago. And he kind of laughed. He said, that's kind of what my manager said. I said, God puts people like you and I together for a reason. I said, we kind of keep that tension going. He's passed away now, but he was one of my very best friends, believe it or not. And we had that tension between us because I'm ready, let's do it now. My friend Sue would say, well, what about? And he always had all these reasons Years ago, the story is told of George Washington, who was going to cross the Potomac, and he needed a bridge built to take the artillery and the equipment across. And so he went to the engineers of the outfit and he said, build me a bridge, I got to have it by 5 o'clock in the morning. And they said, okay. And then he got thinking about it, and he went over to the blacksmith tent. He said, I need a bridge across by morning. The blacksmith, all right. Morning came and they come and said, General, the bridge is ready. And he went, there's the blacksmith, the bridge ready, they went across. He said, where's the engineer? He said, oh, they're back in the tent, they're still drawing plans. That's a true story. And if you know any engineers, and I'm sorry if you are one, but that's a true story. For some reason, God has put a number of engineers in my life. The man I would call my best friend today, Bill Brown, is an engineer. And he's that way. He's a great guy. I love him. So, from where I stand, it's far better to make a wrong decision than not make one at all. Each of us have to confront our own emotional turmoil and sort out our own feelings. The third emotion I want to share with you today is desire. How do you gain desire? I don't know. I don't think I can answer it, because I think there's too many ways. But I do know a couple of things about desire. I know, first of all, it comes from the inside and not the outside. And I know it can be triggered by outside forces. Almost anything can trigger desire. It's a matter of timing as much as preparation. I've spent time with people who have lost a loved one and prayed with them and counseled with them. And often the question that is raised is, how long will these feelings of grief last? Because they don't want to live like this, and yet they don't know what to do. And I always tell them something like this, you know what? You will never get over your grief, but you can learn to live with it. And at times it will become lesser of an influence in your life. But, and I always tell them this, but you may be riding down the road and the sun's shining and you're feeling on top of the world, and a song comes on the radio and it was your husband's favorite song, and automatically, overwhelmingly comes these feelings of grief. That's something you learn to live with. So almost anything can trigger desire. A song that tugs at your heart, a sermon that you never forgot, a conversation with a friend, a confrontation with an enemy, a bitter experience. Even a book or an article can trigger that mechanism from within inside that will make some people say, I want it now. So, when you're looking for your hot button of pure, raw desire, welcome into your life each positive experience. Don't build walls to protect you from experiencing life like so many people have. You know people who've gone through the storm and they build a wall and you can't get through to them. They're living behind an impenetrable wall. And they're so lonely. And they're so filled with sorrow and grief. But the wall that they built to protect themselves has kept everybody else out. So let light touch you, because the next touch could be the one that will turn your life around. One more emotion: determination or resolve. Resolve says, I will. Benjamin Disraeli, the great British statesman, once said, nothing can resist a human will that will stake even his existence on the extent of its purpose. In other words, when somebody says, I'll do it or die, nothing's going to stop it. I've heard people say, I'm going to do it or die trying. All I can say is get out of their way. They're going through. The mountain climber says, I will climb that mountain. They said it's too high, it's too far, it's too steep, it's too rocky. But you'll either see me waving from the top, or you'll never see me again, because I'm going to climb it and reach the peak, or I'm not coming back. How do you argue with that? That's determination. So the best definition for resolve I heard my friend Jim Rohn give. He said he got it from a schoolgirl in California where he was talking to a group of 7th and 8th graders. And he said, who can tell me what resolve means? And several hands went up. He said, I did get some pretty good answers, but the best one was the last one. A little shy girl in the back of the room got up and she said very quiet, with intensity, "I think resolve means promising yourself you will never give up." And he said, "That's it. That's the best definition I've ever heard. Promise yourself you'll never give up." This first Sunday of the new year, promise yourself you're never going to give up. You're going to make it through. Think about it. How long do we give babies to learn how to walk before we say that's enough? You're a reject. We're going to push you around in a baby bump the rest of your life. You say, "Well, that's absurd." When you quit, we never quit. We keep working with them and helping them. And so I say it's no wonder everybody walks, isn't it? Because they're going to walk one way or the other. Lady says, "My baby walked at 9 months." Next one said, "What took yours so long?" At 8 months, mine was standing. Somebody else said, "Something wrong. My baby was a year old before he took his first step." It doesn't matter, does it? The goal is to get them to walk. And we do it. There's a vital lesson in all of this. Just ask yourself, how long am I going to work to make my life meaningful? And I suggest the answer is as long as it takes. And that's what these 4 emotions are all about. Disgust, decision, desire, determination. I'll close with a story. You knew I was going to, didn't you? You know I like to tell stories. Many, many years ago, there was a little village on a rocky seacoast, and this was a place that was very treacherous because of all the rocks and the winds that came through there. Many ships were driven onto the rocks by the storms, and lives of many sailors were lost because of this raging sea. And so one day, some of the people around there decided among themselves that they would establish a lighthouse and a life station on a little peninsula off of the coast. They would do that in order to warn ships away from the rocks and to save lives of those that were cast into that cold, icy sea. And so they went to the government and they pitched their plan and began to secure the necessary funds and also the permits for their project. And they built a tower and they set a light in it and they organized a lookout system. Eventually, they bought some boats and they learned how to man them. They were in business. They were in the business of saving lives. Soon the effects of what they were doing became known far and wide, and fewer ships went on the rocks. And when such a tragedy did occur, and the alarm was sounded, these people risked their own lives in order to rescue those that had been cast into those icy cold waters. Within a few short years, people came from a great distance to study what they'd done and to learn how to do the same thing in their areas. One day somebody had a suggestion. He said, since we spend so much time here at the lighthouse, it'd be good if we could gather here once in a while and enjoy some good fellowship. And they thought that was a good idea, and they put that together. And once in a while, very infrequently at first, they would just all get together when they weren't in a life-saving boat, when they were just enjoying each other's company. And as they did that, they said, this is pretty rough. Concrete walls and concrete floor. We spend a lot of time here, and we're down here so often. Let's make it a little more comfortable. We could actually be here and kind of play games. And so when the alarm goes off, we're right here. We were close. We didn't have to run to get here. And they thought that was a great idea. And so the dry walls became bright and colorful. The floors got covered with carpets, and furniture was brought in. It was a very cozy place. A kitchen was built. And they enjoyed coffee and refreshments, and then they had meals placed there. And one night, a fierce storm blew in. Now, storms had come in for years. A lot of ships had been tossed on those jagged rocks. These men had spent many long hours picking sailors out of the sea. This was not an uncommon occurrence to them. But this one particular night, when the men come back with all these soggy, wet sailors that they pulled out of the sea, some of the men seemed angry and out of sorts. Because it seems like the storm had caused them to leave the comforts of the lighthouse. They were enjoying themselves. They were having a good time. They were having a meal. And why did the ship pick this time to get wrecked in these rocks right now? Any number of things we'd rather do than go out on a dark night like tonight and risk our lives. And they were cold. They were very cold. And another thing happened. They brought these cold, wet, half-drowned sailors in. You know what they did? They made the carpets dirty. They did. The carpets began to look gray and dingy. The beautiful walls began to show signs of wear and tear. The kitchen was a mess. Forget about the stove. It too was a mess. So they had a meeting. And it was decided that the sailors, when they were brought to the lighthouse, we will take them down to the basement first. There won't be any carpet down there. We'll take it down there and get them cleaned up before we mess up our lighthouse. And sometime later, another storm blew in, and this time about half the men went out in the boats, and you know why, don't you? The other half didn't really see the need to get dirty themselves. And this time the ship that had broken apart on the rocks was from another nation. People were a different color. They spoke a different language. And they brought them back to the lighthouse. And a few more men joined those that refused to enter the sea. And they decided that men like these didn't really belong in their lighthouse at all. And some said they felt like the lighthouse's job was not supposed to be saving sailors from other lands because they're so different. There were those too that they objected to going out, leaving what they had, and getting cold, wet, and going into the storm. And so they petitioned the government, and the government agreed. And so it was decided that the beacon would be kept lit, but the rescue work would be discontinued. There was a small group, though, that disagreed with this decision. And they went down the coast a short distance and started a new lighthouse. And this small group decided that they should establish the biggest life-saving station on the little peninsula. And they did. And every day they warned ships and sometimes attempted to save life from the icy water. Fame of the new lighthouse grew. And the lighthouse back up on the bay eventually turned off its beacon. And some people say the beacon can still be seen today in you and I. Oh yes. There's still a small group running the new lighthouse where they were once rescued from the raging sea. And I want to tell you this morning that this is one of the reasons why I love the Gospel Center. This is one of the things that makes the Gospel Center so special. We all of us have been rescued. We know what it's like. Been out in the sea, in the storm. Everyone here has a past. But that's not nearly as important as our future. We, as people, all have a choice to make with regard to our rescue work. We can allow and choose to allow our lives to become comfortable, or we can find ourselves very content. And oftentimes we may find out that we've turned out the very beacon that provided hope for one another. Or, and I hope and pray that we do, we find ourselves lighting and saving the paths of others, both in words and deeds. I don't ever want our Saturday night services to become routine, common, or something we do, or something we've always done. The Gospel Center is going to be a beacon of light in Lebanon. It's going to be because everything we do is done with a passion, with a purpose. Not one of us that work downstairs on Saturday night is doing it because we think somebody's going to starve that night if we don't feed them. That's not why we're there. I'll tell you what we do think. We think someone may lose their life without ever knowing that somebody cared for them or somebody loved them. And that's what we want to do. We want to display love. Let them know they're cared for. So here's what I know. And what I want to know. Here's what I want to know today. Does your light still shine? Or is it dim? Maybe faded. You know, I've looked at my car, and I'm sure my headlights are not as bright as they were because it's hazy. I'm going to have to do something with it because it just doesn't have the brilliance that it once had. And then I look at my life and I say, has it dimmed? Faded? Perhaps even gone out? Maybe you've been in one storm too many. I don't know what's going on in your life, but I do know that now is not the time to give up. It's a brand new year. There's too much at stake. Here's what I want to tell you. God doesn't care what you've done, where you've been, how long you've been gone. Here's what God cares about. Where are you now? Today could be the first day of the rest of your life. You ever heard anyone say, I wish I could start over? But I'd like to this time with the knowledge that I've gained. Well, you can start over. Yesterday's past. Tomorrow's not here. But today you can make a fresh start. The first day of your life. Let's stand.